Groundwork has been around for about 20 years. We were born, I should say, of the National Park Service at their 150th anniversary. They visited a Groundwork London and saw that youth, they had a high youth unemployment rate, and they also had a lot of urban blight. Groundwork brought these things kind of together and employed the youth to address the blight in London. Very, very successful program. The National Park Service wished to replicate that. Fast forward, they did an RFP and Groundwork was born. Today, I think there's 23 of us. Our startup funding comes from the National Park Service, and we really are trying to change places and change lives. I think the real interesting thing about Groundwork, and what I would want everyone's takeaways to be, is most of the whether they be professional or governmental organizations that focus on the environment, whether it be natural resource conservation services, you could look at our cooperative extensions, our farm bureaus, etc. For the last 75 years, they have walked out of our cities. Small problem is that's our people are walking back into our cities. It's critical at this time that nature and the environment be part of our urban areas. If nothing else, increasing our tree coverage will reduce our possibility of flooding, and we've recently had some tragic flooding. So today's Groundwork Elizabeth, we work really focus on youth development, engaging youth in environmental justice topics, whether it be clean air, clean water, reuse of adaptive reuse of brownfields, things like that. And then in the last couple of years, we've really gotten into climate change. So we have a climate safe task force that works to identify policy issues, kind of push them up the chain, and put together the stakeholders' wants and needs so that our governments, corporations, et cetera, can understand what the community would like to be. So there's a little bit of background to how I got into my current grant. So we received the grant from the EPA. It's an environmental justice small grant, port specific. Elizabeth, for those of you who don't know, it is Newark Marine, it's Port Newark and Elizabeth Marine Terminal. At one point, it was the busiest terminal in the United States. I think that moves around a little bit now. The city of Elizabeth has the airport to the north, the marine terminal to the northeast. The turnpike runs down one side, 1 and 9 runs down one side, and then right below us is the Phillips 66 Bayway Refinery area, which is, obviously of national importance. It supplies most of the fuels, et cetera, on our East Coast, or many of the fuels on our East Coast. So as a result, our community is hotter, we are wetter, we have a higher incidence of asthma. In certain areas, especially where our housing authorities are, you expect people to have a shorter life expectancy, and their economic outlooks remain poor. All of this really started, has a lot to do with earlier redlining policies, which made a nice portion of Elizabeth unavailable for purchase, and really increased our utilities. So as we have been looking around to understand what Groundwork Elizabeth can champion and engage the community in, and really educate the community in, we really have taken a deep dive into air quality. You shouldn't live on one side of town and maybe, have asthma, and live on the other side and not have asthma simply because of where you live. But it's very true here that your zip code really is going to tell more about your future, unfortunately, than anything else. We were alerted to an environmental justice small grant, port specific, when we realized that it's time for our ports, whether they be airports or ports, to understand that they are creating a tremendous burden on our community. So as we began to investigate different ways to first measure air quality, there's not too much measurement going on, although we do have an EPA site in Elizabeth on the turnpike. We began to, do some reading, do some research, et cetera, and to bring it all back to biofuels, realize that if we could take even the fleet of the port, I'm sorry, Port Newark and Elizabeth Marine Terminal, trying to use their proper names. If we could just reduce that fleet, we believe we would see some difference in our air qualities. As such, we made a proposal. It was accepted. I'm very thrilled that it was accepted. And right now we're in the process of increasing air monitors, installing 12 purple air monitors in Elizabeth, and leading ongoing community conversations to get us to the point. We're getting into the port primer right now. And we've had some beginning really good conversations with the port. Our ports do understand that things are going to be needing to change, and that's really what got me to this place.
It's fascinating and frustrating at the same time to believe and know that communities can be so subjected to so many of these factors that affect their quality of life simply by where they live and the industry that's near them.
Yep.
You mentioned the airport, not the airport. Newark Liberty Airport.
Yep.
There's a lot of industry there. I guess there's all the factories around, not factories, but all the industry that lies around the highways that you drive. When you drive down the turnpike, you've got them on both sides.
Absolutely.
I think there's a cogen plant there as well.
I believe you're correct. A little bit of everything tends to end up over there.
Fuel tanks, you name it.
Absolutely.
So
heavy trucking, heavy constant trucking. Also, just as a sidebar, what we found out in groundwork Elizabeth worked on was getting the trucks. There's a shortcut through a couple streets in Elizabeth, and we took a couple of years, but those trucks are now not allowed on those streets and do have to go around. Sidebar, but following your point.
Well, they're contributing even more to
absolutely,
to the asthma rates. To just, you said it's hotter there.
Absolutely.
Why are people still living there?
Why do people live where they do? I mean, it's an excellent question. Something I think is important to understand first is that we all live within our own fiscal realities. When you have the resources you need for your basic food and shelter, you need those resources first before you kind of look outside. Down by the port in the city of Elizabeth was the Singer sewing machine factory. At one point, one of the largest employers in the United States. And after they closed, the area down by the port was also redlined. Just really fell into some disrepair, et cetera. And it became a rather low income area. It had been a really happening company town, I would say, before that, just kind of for lack of a better word. And, you began to see intergenerational poverty. And I say these things really just to underscore the fact that if you don't have the money to feed yourself, to provide shelter, having a car, or a laundry machine, there's these things, these quality of lives. And when you're barely making that, there's no room. There's no room to move. Where do you move to? Those who are under-resourced and living at the poverty line clearly need to be near transportation, public transportation. So, moving from a 3-bedroom at 1,800 in Elizabeth to a 3-bedroom for 1,200 in, I don't know, Sussex County somewhere, there's no work. So we find ourselves kind of in this crunch place, or these certain populations find themselves in this place where they need to stay in the area because they need the infrastructure, the area supplies, but they don't have enough resources that they can choose to perhaps move into a suburb, and I don't want to say escape, but put themselves in a different position. Also, and I've said this 100 different ways. If you don't have resources, some of the things that those with resources care about, you just don't. If you don't have food on the table, you don't. The asthma really doesn't hit you. If you have, you having asthma, well, so did everyone else in your family. It must be a family thing. So you see this lack of education in these communities about what their most pressing issues are, because the most pressing issues are basic survival for those communities. And unfortunately, whether it be air pollution or flooding, etc., it is these under-resourced communities that are hit the hardest, and they're not able to have the resources to deal with what is being placed upon them. Your person who has limited resources loses their car in a flood, didn't have the right insurance, their whole economic reality, comes crashing down. So I think it's important to understand the different socioeconomic levels when you look at the psychology of why would people stay in an area, in an area that has poor air quality, or there were water issues, etc.
And you've said that while they lack these resources, many people living in such areas really aren't aware of what they're consuming, what they're breathing,
For sure.
or even conscious of the fact that it's so hot because of all the traffic that's just been filling the area with smog. And it's who's informing them about these dangers?
Me. Organization, first, it's your federal government. There's a certain responsibility that the federal government has to monitor, water, air, et cetera, et cetera. After you go down from there, it's going to be in New Jersey, obviously, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Then going down to your city, and then maybe, to a block group. The issue that comes in is, although there is the lack of agreement on what we would want to teach our children about the environment. I mean, we still do have conversations of people who clearly there's no climate change and everything is good. So I always say the government is usually the worst at promoting itself. They do so many amazing things, but when it comes to actual education, just general public education of the work that is being done, the majority has no clue. I'll give you a great example. I had the absolute pleasure of working with the Department of Environmental Protection this summer on a youth inclusion initiative. For us, it was 12 kids, City of Elizabeth, from the Housing Authority. I do a lot of work with our Housing Authority. They're a fantastic partner. And we had the best summer ever. We explored the DEP. We learned about water quality and water testing and air quality and air testing. We learned about conservation. We learned about conservation firefighters, et cetera. And the thing I kept on hearing, first half of it, I had absolutely no clue about. But from these kids was, I had no idea our water's tested every day in, 200 locations. I had no idea they were, testing the air, et cetera. So, I say a couple of things. One, we don't understand. Two, I feel that the people who do protect our environment, although they are reports, the report doesn't, I find the information doesn't tend to get to general public. So it ends up kind of with nonprofits and concern, like neighborhood groups, et cetera, to begin to understand, hey, what's going on with our air? What's going on with our water? We have brownfields. What does that mean? Can I be there? Can I not be there? Et cetera. There's a ton of information coming at people, every day at all times. but not a lot of the information on the state of our environment necessarily comes down to our children, who probably are our best educators, and to our communities who don't directly participate in these activities.
Elizabeth is a diverse community,
Very
um,
much so.
so I would imagine there's a language barrier on top of everything, correct?
Yes, definitely a language barrier.
Mm.
We are a city, not completely of immigrants. We have a heavy immigrant population here. I think at last count we had 69 different nationalities. Um, uh, and it usually takes some time for them, obviously takes time for them to acclimate. And very often, information has not been done in, I mean, for us, we would probably say English and Spanish, maybe English, Spanish, and Creole. And there are some other Haitian, there's some other ethnicities that I would bring up. I will say this, in the last 5 years, the city of Elizabeth now supplies all information in both English and Spanish, as do our libraries and our schools for general, like, flyers, etc. We are, this city at least is very well aware that we have an extremely diverse community, and we really celebrate it. But that is not the case every place. This is Northeast New Jersey. We are the most liberal place on the planet. So we tend to be forward thinking.
A person such as yourself, I don't always, I don't every day would think, is thinking by clean alternative fuels, uh, you know, biodiesel based fuels. When did these alternatives come across your radar screen, and do you see them as really a strong step forward in trying to address this issue?
So a dear friend of mine moved to California, to Humboldt County, 17 years ago. And about 10 years ago, she told me about this glorious diesel Mercedes that she bought, and she was switching it to veggie oil. That was, I'm sure actually plenty of people have very similar stories. That was my first introduction to biofuels. I think that our energy future has to be diverse. I don't think that any fuel energy source at this time comes with absolutely no issues. Everything has some kind of issues that go with it. And I think it's super important for us to diversify how we choose our energy future. Um, in listening to and doing my own research and trying to better understand how things work, I did some exploration in biofuels, and after some conversation, what I realized is there is we are moving away from traditional gas as we know it, and it seems like quite a rush to jump to electric. And I think that it seems like quite an easier, it sounds like an easy answer. And I don't really think it is. I think that there's some really great opportunities for biofuels. Um, and one thing that kind of that does stick out to me is, as our gas changes, we'll be losing quite a bit of, how do you say, if we're not putting ethanol in our gas, there's going to be quite a bit of resources that will need to be directed into other things as time goes by. There's also waste everywhere that can be turned into some type of biofuel. We will need to become better recyclers and better users of resources. There's no choice. And I think that biofuels can be a great answer for where we are, right now. And then with everything, I guess we see how we go as we come along.
I've shared the same thinking. I mean, I like electric. I think it's awesome that we're, suddenly pivoting towards everything electric. but something has to generate the the help generate that electricity.
Absolutely.
We don't have enough hydro power, hydro power generators and windmills to produce the electricity, and biodiesel does provide one option, right?
Yep.
For transportation and for heating, which is what your panel was focused on.
Mhm.
So hopefully addressing some of the issues locally in Elizabeth, getting people to switch over to biodiesel-based heating, um, and providing the electricity locally with maybe or converting more vehicles to biodiesel-based fuel. That's one way to start. However, Elizabeth has the unfortunate circumstance of having a highway that travels right through it, right? Two of them. So all those vehicles have to be converted, right? The only complaint I heard from first adopters of recycled restaurant oil was that it stinks.
I will say my girlfriend lasted about 2.5 years, and I do think that there was some smell issues. I'm not exactly recalling, but I've heard similar things.
But right now sounds like a small price to pay for having a Mercedes. So
I thought it was a pretty cool looking car myself.
it's been fascinating revisiting this with you.
Oh, thank
I
you.
hear what you're saying. I can't imagine it can't happen fast enough for you, right?
I invite anyone who thinks that we can wait for a clean energy future to come meet some of my friends at the housing authority who are dealing with asthma. And I think when you see a 3-year-old who can barely breathe, I think it really underscores the urgency to clean up our fuel situation. And biofuels are there. So where they can fit in, I firmly believe they're a part of our energy future, and I'm really hopeful that we'll see some progress in our work with the port of the Port Newark and Elizabeth Marine Terminal, the port, and the Port Authority as well. And yeah, I'm definitely hopeful. I pretty sure in the end we all want the same thing. We want clean air, clean water, and safety. To enjoy our lives and our families and the good opportunities that are available to us. So crossing fingers.